The bride covered her face in shame. He pulled her veil gently and said, "You're beautiful?" Wyoming Territory, spring of 1875. The midday sun hung high over the dusty plain, casting a brittle light across the small train station at Millstone Junction. A crowd had gathered under the awning, townsfolk murmuring, wiping sweat from their brows, craning necks toward the distant sound of a steam engine. The train from the east was arriving, and with it, the bride. Margaret Doyle stepped down from the passenger car with a small carpet bag in one hand and a bundle of nerves in the other. Her figure was wrapped in a pale blue dress, modest and pressed, though dulled by travel dust. Over her face hung a thick veil, fastened tightly beneath her chin. Beneath it, the left side of her face ached from the memory of old pain, a scar running from her cheekbone to the line of her jaw, the price of a childhood fire. But even more painful than the scar was the truth behind her name. She was the daughter of Samuel Doyle, a man hanged for treason during the final year of the Civil War. As her boots touched the platform, the murmurs began. "Is that her? Come all the way from Virginia, I heard. Having view, at a veil, you think she hides a face or a name." Maggie stood still for a moment, gripping the handle of her bag tighter. Her heart pounded like hooves across a prairie. She had rehearsed this arrival in her mind 100 times. She would step off, lift her veil with grace, and Richard Hale would smile. He stood now at the end of the platform, tall and composed in a dark brown suit, silver pocket watch chain glinting in the light. His black hat-shaded eyes that watched her with unreadable expression. His beard was trimmed, his boots polished. Everything about him was orderly, successful, unyielding. She began to walk. 1 step, 2, a pause, another step. The townspeople shifted. Their curiosity soured into something sharper. A man near the post office spat and muttered, "That is Doyle's girl, the traitor." A woman hissed behind a fan, "What kind of man marries the daughter of a turncoat?" Richard heard them. She could see it in the way his mouth thinned. But he said nothing. He did not step forward. He did not offer a hand. She stopped before him. The platform had grown silent. Maggie swallowed. Her fingers trembled as they reached for the edge of the veil. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to lift it. The cloth slipped past her chin, her lips, her cheek. A collective breath held, and then Richard's face hardened. His eyes dropped to the scar and stayed there. His voice was loud and final. "I cannot marry you." Maggie froze, the veil half lifted. A ripple went through the crowd. "God help her," someone whispered. The closer he came, the harder he said it. One plain turned her away, just like that. Maggie's hand fell. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, filled with tears that slid hot and silent beneath the veil. Her knees buckled. She sank slowly to the wooden platform, carpet bag slipping from her grasp. Her fingers clawed to pull the veil back down, covering her shame. Richard turned and walked away. The townspeople began to disperse, but not before throwing looks of pity, scorn, or worse, amusement. "Serves her right. Poor thing, no place for a traitor's daughter here." Maggie remained there on the steps of the depot, alone but for the dust, the silence, and the weight of a name she never asked for. The crowd had vanished. Dust settled. Wind whistled across the platform, where Maggie still sat, small, still, hollow-eyed. From the edge of the depot's porch, a figure stepped forward. Ethan McGraw. Tall, broad-shouldered, his boots dusty from the trail. At 28, he wore the quiet weight of a man who had seen war and come home changed. A faint scar crossed his temple, half hidden beneath dark hair. He carried no hat, no arrogance, just presence. He crouched beside her and gently touched the corner of her veil. "No one ever told you. You're beautiful," he said softly. Maggie stared at him through the fabric. His voice wasn't mocking, just honest. He offered his hand, not to pull her up, just to offer it. She took it. He helped her to her feet and led her to a 2-horse wagon. They rode in silence to the outskirts of Millstone Junction, where pine met prairie, and a log cabin stood alone against the hills. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Everything about the place was simple, used, and cared for. Inside, Ethan showed her a bed in the corner. "You can rest here tonight," he said, then nodded toward the hearth. "There's tea, if you want it." Maggie sat, hands in her lap. "I won't stay long." "Didn't think you would," he replied. He left her in peace. That night she lay clothed beneath a quilt that smelled of pine. She listened to the quiet rustle of Ethan moving through the cabin, the creak of a chair, boots on old floorboards, the hush of tools being cleaned. No questions, no judgment. She fell asleep from exhaustion, not comfort. Morning brought birdsong and soft light through the window. On the small table by her bed sat a cup of warm water. The broken chair in the corner was repaired. The floor had been swept. Fresh cloth lay on the table, beside a plate of bread and honey. Ethan was nowhere in sight. She sat up slowly, unsure if any of it was real. She found him outside, splitting wood, sleeves rolled, brow damp. He did not look at her. "I'll be on my way," she said. He nodded once. "You know where the road is." She turned, made it 5 steps, then stopped. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and fast-moving. A storm was coming. She looked to the sky, then back to the cabin, and turned around. Ethan said nothing, just opened the door. By afternoon, wind tore through the trees like a warning. Rain pounded the roof. Thunder cracked across the sky. They worked fast, pulling canvas across the windows, tying down the chicken coop. Maggie's sleeves were soaked, her hair pulled loose. Ethan braced a board above the hearth while she fought to keep the door shut. A crack overhead. "Roof beam!" he shouted. The beam groaned, splintering. Maggie grabbed his arm, yanking him back as it gave way. They fell together, hitting the ground hard as wood crashed behind them. Silence followed, broken only by the howling storm. They lay breathless, side by side, hearts hammering. "You all right?" Ethan asked. She nodded. "You?" "I will be." He pushed up slowly and offered his hand again. She took it. They sat on the floor against the wall while rain poured through the broken roof. Water puddled on the floorboards. Maggie shivered. Ethan took off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. He said nothing more, did not ask questions, did not flinch from her scar. For the first time in years, Maggie felt something unexpected. She felt needed. In the days that followed the storm, something subtle began to shift. Maggie no longer kept her veil on while inside the cabin. She still pulled it over her face when stepping outside, but within those wooden walls she let the scar breathe. Ethan never stared. He never turned away either. He simply looked at her when he spoke, as if the mark on her cheek were no more scandalous than a freckle. Their days settled into a quiet rhythm. She boiled water while he repaired the gate. They mended fences together in the morning sun. Maggie showed him how to make butter from cream. Ethan taught her to brace a loose beam with a nail and instinct. In the evenings they shared meals by the fire, mostly silence, sometimes stories. One night, as the kettle steamed and the wind whistled outside, Ethan spoke. "My brother died in the last week of the war," he said, eyes on the flames. "Cannon fire, near Franklin. He was 20. I held what was left of him. Buried him myself." Maggie looked down at her hands. "I am sorry," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "When it ended, I rode home, but there was no home. Town burned, mother gone, land taken. So I kept riding." A pause. The fire crackled. Then Maggie spoke, quieter than the kettle. "My father was hanged outside Richmond. They said he passed messages to the Confederacy. Maybe he did. He never told me. I was 12. Ethan looked at her. She continued. "We were forced out of town. My mother died 2 winters later. I was passed between relatives. No one wanted a traitor's daughter." The silence that followed was full of understanding. 2 days later, Ethan invited her into town. Supplies were low. Maggie hesitated, then pulled her veil on. At the general store, she kept her head down. Ethan moved between the aisles. They did not speak, but others did. Outside, two men leaned on the railing, smirking. "Guess Hale didn't want her. McGraw probably plans to sell her instead," one said. "Might be worth a few coins with a sack over her head," said the other. Maggie froze. Her fingers trembled on a bag of beans. Ethan heard. His shoulders stiffened, but he said nothing. The ride home was silent. That night, Maggie lay awake, the voices echoing. She touched the scar on her cheek. How long could kindness last before pity turned cruel? 3 days passed. Then one afternoon, outside the saloon, a drunk sneered loudly. "That one keeps a branded woman in his bed? Or is he selling her by weight?" Ethan turned. Without a word, he stepped in front of the man, raising a hand, not to strike, but to stop. "She is kinder, stronger, and more decent than anyone in this town. Speak her name again, and I will not be this gentle." The man blinked, stepped back. Ethan walked away. Word spread quickly. That night, Maggie said nothing. She stirred the stew and ate quietly. Later, while Ethan checked the horses, she began to pack. Clothes, scarf, coin pouch. She made it halfway to the gate. "Maggie," Ethan called. She kept walking. "Maggie, wait." He caught her arm, not hard, but firm. She stopped. He stood close, his breath short. "You do not have to stay, but if you think I took you in for anything other than you are wrong." She didn't speak. He stepped closer, whispering, "I do not need anything else, just you." Her shoulders trembled. She dropped the bag, and for the first time she turned around without reaching for the veil. Richard Hale was not a man accustomed to being humiliated, and being left on a train platform in front of the entire town was humiliation he would not forget. Word of Maggie Doyle's refuge with Ethan McGraw spread like dust on a dry wind. The whispers reached every corner of Millstone Junction. Richard heard them all. He heard that she was still in town. He heard that Ethan, the quiet war veteran turned mule driver, had taken her in. He heard that they lived together under one roof. And the laughter that came with those rumors struck him like bullets, so he paid a man to ride in from Laramie. Not a man known for talking, a man known for sending messages with the butt of his rifle. Maggie felt the change before she saw it. That morning, Ethan returned from town with a split lip and a stiff gait. He said nothing, just handed her a sack of flour and wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "What happened?" she asked, reaching for his arm. He shrugged. "Walked into the wrong voice. It will heal." But that night, when the shutters creaked in the wind and the horses whinnied in their sleep, Maggie could not rest. Her chest tightened with something more than fear, guilt. She sat beside Ethan by the fire, eyes shining in the low light. "If I had not come here," she whispered, "none of this would have touched you." Ethan looked up slowly. "If you had not come here," he said, "there would be nothing worth protecting." She blinked, startled. "I know danger. I have lived through worse than Hale's pride," he continued. "But you gave me reason again." He leaned forward, resting his hand gently over hers. "You are not the danger, Maggie. You are the reason I stand between it and something good." The attack came just before dawn. Maggie woke to the sound of wood splintering. The back door. Ethan had his revolver in hand before his feet hit the floor. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low, steady. A figure burst through the door, dark coat, bandana over his face, shotgun raised. Ethan fired once, missed. The stranger tackled him, slamming both to the floor. Furniture crashed. The hearth spit sparks across the rug. Maggie screamed. The intruder drew a knife, slashing wildly. Ethan grunted, taking the blow to his side before kicking the man off. Blood soaked through his shirt, spreading fast. Maggie grabbed the iron poker by the fire and swung it with all her might. The man cursed, reeled back, and fled through the broken door. Ethan collapsed to his knees, pressing one hand to the wound. "Ethan, I am all right," he lied, teeth clenched. He wasn't. Maggie ran into the night barefoot, the wind cutting through her shawl, her heart pounding so loud it drowned the world. She did not stop to think. She did not reach for her veil. She did not care who saw. She burst into the center of town, still lit with lanterns from the saloon, where a few early risers and late drinkers lingered near the porch. "Help!" she shouted, voice breaking. "Someone, please! He is bleeding!" Heads turned, then froze. She stood in the center of the street, face uncovered, hair tangled, nightdress stained with blood. There was a long, unbearable silence. Someone whispered, "It's her, Doyle's daughter." But no one laughed, no one jeered, no one turned away. They looked, and kept looking, not at the scar, not at the name, but at the fear in her eyes, the tears on her cheeks. And something shifted. Within minutes, the blacksmith and 2 ranch hands followed her back to the cabin. Ethan was barely conscious, blood pooling on the floor. They lifted him onto the table while Maggie knelt beside him, pressing cloth against the wound, her hands soaked and shaking. "He needs a doctor," one of them said. "He will not make it to Cheyenne. Then we bring the doc here." When Maggie looked up again, she saw them, the faces at the broken doorway. Townsfolk who had once crossed the street to avoid her now stood with buckets, cloth, candles. A woman she did not know lit the fire again. A young boy collected water. No one asked questions. They just helped, and no one said a word about the scar. Ethan drifted in and out of fever for nearly 3 days. The wound in his side bled deep, and though the town doctor stitched it, infection clung to him like smoke. Maggie barely left his side. She sponged his forehead, coaxed broth into his mouth, changed bandages with hands that trembled less each time. She did not wear the veil again, not once. There was no point, no fear, not anymore. By the 2nd day, the townspeople had gone, leaving behind folded linens, clean water, a loaf of fresh bread on the porch. The silence that followed was no longer filled with judgment. It was peace. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan opened his eyes. His breath was shallow, but steady. When he looked at her, really looked, it was not with confusion or pity. It was with the warmth of someone who had waited to come back to the world for one reason only. "You stayed?" he whispered, his voice rough. Maggie smiled softly, brushing damp hair from his brow. "Of course I did." He looked at her for a long time. Then his gaze drifted to the scar on her cheek, raw in the morning light. "You are still Maggie," he said. "Not a wound, not a secret, just Maggie." Her lips parted, a breath catching in her chest. "I used to think," she murmured, "that people only saw the mark." "I see the girl who stayed," he said. "That's all?" The days after his recovery were slow but filled with purpose. Maggie planted onions and potatoes in the raised bed by the fence. Ethan, leaning on a crutch, helped mend the hole in the roof. She brought him nails and held the ladder. He taught her how to oil a saddle properly, how to check the hooves of their mare. She taught him how to knead dough and boil coffee without burning it. They began to talk more, about things that did not hurt, books they liked, silly dreams, what chickens they might buy next spring. One afternoon, Maggie opened the window to let in the breeze and found the scent of lilac from the hill behind the house. She followed it with bare feet and a soft hum in her throat. Ethan found her there an hour later, sitting in the tall grass, crown of wildflowers in her lap. "You have dirt on your face," he said. "So do you." They laughed, just laughed. Later they sat on the roof of the cabin, legs dangling over the edge. Rain had just begun to fall, light and rhythmic. The whole prairie glowed silver in the dusk. Maggie leaned back on her hands, face tilted up, eyes closed. Water soaked her hair, dripped down her neck, but she did not flinch. Ethan glanced sideways at her. "Cold?" "No," she said. "It feels good, like it's washing something old away." A pause, then, in a voice softer than the rain, "I used to think no one would ever look at me the way they look at other women." "I never saw other women," Ethan replied. She turned to him then, and something in her eyes flickered, like the last barrier falling. She smiled. Not a timid, polite smile, a real one. It lit her face from within, transforming every scar, every wound, into something radiant. Ethan stared, struck silent. Then she leaned her head gently against his shoulder, her fingers brushing his. The rain kept falling, and either of them moved. And for the first time in her life, Maggie did not feel like she was being held together. She felt whole. The peace that had settled over Maggie and Ethan's home did not last long. Whispers began to stir again, this time not in Millstone Junction, but beyond it, carried by travelers, letters, passing stagecoachmen. Whispers that the woman Richard Hale had rejected was now living openly with another man, a hired hand with no name worth printing. Richard heard them all. He did not lash out immediately. No, he waited. Let the anger simmer, let the insult ferment into something sharp and vengeful. Then he made his move. She rode into town on a crisp morning, dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, and declared, loud enough for every ear to catch, that he would restore what was owed and take Maggie Doyle as his wife, with or without her permission. "This town will not shelter shame under my nose," he said, lips curled. "She belongs with a man who can restore her dignity." It was not about love. It never had been. It was about ownership, reputation, control. 2 days later, Maggie's past arrived by train. Her mother stepped onto the platform with frail shoulders and trembling hands. Behind her walked a boy of 16, Daniel, her younger brother, taller than she remembered but with the same nervous eyes. Neither had written ahead. They simply appeared, bags in hand, summoned by fear. They came straight to the cabin. Maggie opened the door to find her mother's eyes already wet. "He's threatened to seize our sponsor's land," she whispered, voice brittle. "Said if we don't bring you back, he'll see us homeless." Maggie stared at her, heart pounding. "He has no right," she said. "No," her mother replied, "but he has power, and we have none." Inside, Ethan stayed silent. He listened from the other room, the tension between duty and love thick in the air. Later that night, Maggie sat on the porch, knees drawn to her chest, the sky bleeding purple over the fields. She had no veil, no fear of her face, but now her shame came not from her name or scar, but from how her heart was being pulled in 2 directions. Her mother stood inside, weeping. Her brother needed protection, but Ethan had given her a life, a love. She turned as he stepped outside and joined her on the step. They sat without words for a long while. Then Maggie whispered, "I cannot let them lose everything because of me." "I know," Ethan said. "I should go." He nodded slowly. "If that's what you need." Maggie's lips trembled. "Do you want me to stay?" His voice was quiet, unshaken. "More than anything." She looked away. "Then, ask me." He turned to her, eyes steady. "I will not keep you like a prize won in a fight. You are free, Maggie, but this place, this life, it is your home if you choose it." She looked at him then, full in the face. The man who had never asked for more than she could give, who had fought for her, not with fists alone, but with respect, who had waited for her to feel whole, not just wanted. Tears welled up in her eyes. "You make it so hard to leave," she whispered. "And I always will," he replied. She stood and walked into the night, alone, to think, to feel, to decide. Morning came. When the sun touched the window panes, Ethan opened the front door to find her already outside, boiling water for coffee, her back turned to the road. Her veil was nowhere in sight. "I told them no," she said without looking up. Ethan stood there, watching her shoulders rise and fall with quiet strength. They cried, begged, "But I will not trade one prison for another." She turned. Her eyes met his. "I belong here," she said, "not because of obligation, but because of what I feel when I look at you." He stepped forward, and she moved into his arms without hesitation. The decision had been made. Love, once tested, now stood stronger than ever. Dawn broke gray and heavy over the prairie as Ethan spotted them, 6 riders led by Richard Hale, circling the edge of the farmyard like wolves. Dust curled under their horses' hooves, swirling in the chill air. Ethan swallowed the dread in his throat. He had prepared for this moment, but facing it under the rising sun gave it a brutal clarity. "Get inside," he told Maggie, voice steady. "Take Daniel to the barn." She nodded, grabbed her brother's hand, and disappeared behind the gate. Ethan moved quickly. He knew the land, the shed, the storm-damaged fence, the cottonwoods lining the western edge. He planted sharpened stakes under the dirt path, angled mirrors in the trees to catch the sun's glare, set logs to roll under hoof. Richard's men came hard. Fence wood cracked under them. Shouts rose with dust and gunfire. Ethan fired from cover. One man fell. Another cried out, blood blooming across his chest. The rest pulled back, startled. At the barn, Maggie held Daniel close, her eyes fixed on Ethan, no longer just frightened, but something steadier. A quiet faith. Richard rolled forward, sneering. "You think you can protect her, mongrel?" Ethan leveled his revolver. A hoof crashed nearby. A shot splintered the barn door. Ethan pulled Maggie and Daniel to safety, shielding them with his body. Maggie's shawl caught flame at the edge. She smothered it, coughed through smoke, but didn't run. She stayed. Richard circled again. 2 riders moved to flank Ethan. Then Ethan's traps sprang. One man's horse tripped on a hidden log, the other blinded by glare. A shot rang. Ethan's. Another rider down. Maggie saw her chance. She grabbed an oil lantern, threw it at the feed stall where Hale's horses were tied. Flames roared to life, sparks leaping into dry hay. Chaos. Horses screamed, men scattered. Ethan rushed into the smoke, shoved a man off Maggie's path. Then a board gave way underfoot. He fell hard, clutching his side. Maggie screamed his name and ran to him, ignoring the blaze. She pressed a cloth to his wound, hands slick with blood. Richard tried to turn his horse, to retreat, but Ethan, eyes blazing with pain and defiance, fired. The bullet struck Hale in the shoulder. He crumpled into the dirt. His men froze. The air crackled with smoke and silence. One dropped his weapon. Ethan's knees buckled. Maggie caught him, dragging him from the flames. He collapsed in her arms. Townfolk began to gather, drawn by the smoke. Men who once scorned Maggie, women who had turned away. They came now, watching as she held Ethan, her face bare, marked with soot and tears. The blacksmith stepped forward. A rancher offered help. Together they lifted. Ethan Reichard lay groaning. No one touched him. No one helped. Maggie didn't look at him. She only looked at Ethan. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, stay." The people watched her, not with judgment, but with awe. Daniel clutched her skirt. A woman wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. A stranger offered water. No one spoke of shame. Ethan stirred, his voice faint. "You!" Maggie bent low, pressing his hand to her lips. "You are my home," she whispered. Then, as dawn burned away the smoke, silence settled. Richard was hauled away by his men, his name spoken only in hushed tones. But Maggie stayed, wrapped in ash and love, holding the man who had chosen her not despite her past, but because he saw beyond it. The final confrontation was over, and love had endured. The smoke had begun to settle, curling low over the scorched earth. Ash floated in the air like snow, soft and strange. The fire had mostly died, save for a few stubborn embers flickering in the hay. And in the center of it all, where the battle had burned the fiercest, Maggie knelt in the dirt with Ethan in her arms, her face bare, streaked with soot and tears, her veil forgotten. A hush fell over the crowd that had gathered. Men who had once spit at her name now stood silent, hats in hand. Women who had turned their backs now held handkerchiefs to their mouths. No one spoke, until one figure, a small, wrinkled woman with silver hair and a black shawl, stepped forward from the circle. She moved slowly, deliberately, kneeling beside Maggie without asking permission. In her hands, a cloth already damp with water. "Let me help," the old woman said gently, pressing the cloth against Ethan's side. Maggie looked at her, startled. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman didn't answer right away. She was busy working, steady despite the shaking in her own fingers. A murmur moved through the crowd. It wasn't cruel this time. It wasn't mockery. "She's not the daughter of a trader," someone said softly, a man in a ranch coat, eyes glassy. "She's the bravest woman in this town." Maggie heard it. Her chest tightened. Her hand tightened around Ethan's. Ethan's breath rattled, shallow and labored. He tried to open his eyes. His hand moved, barely, fingers lifting toward her cheek. She caught it in both of hers, guiding his rough palm to the side of her face. "Ethan, I'm here," she said, voice breaking. "You're safe." He exhaled weakly, a smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. His eyes fluttered open, just enough to see her, really see her. "No one," he rasped, the words like wind through cracked wood, "ever told you—" His thumb brushed gently over the scar on her cheek. "You're beautiful?" Her breath hitched. She let out a sob that shook her whole body. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his, tears falling freely onto his shirt, his neck, the earth beneath them. "You came for me," he whispered. "And I always will," she said. The people around them remained still, reverent. No one dared interrupt. Something sacred had begun to unfold. Daniel stepped beside them, silent and pale, watching his sister cry not from shame, but from love. The old woman touched Maggie's shoulder lightly. "He needs a doctor again. We can bring him." Maggie nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Help me lift him." They carried Ethan together, Maggie on one side, Daniel on the other, into the cabin that had almost burned, but still stood. The walls smelled of smoke and sweat and something ancient. Hope. Over the next 2 days, the town sent supplies, linens, medicine, even sugar. The doctor came twice. Men helped repair the fence. No one asked questions. No one demanded apologies. What needed to be said had already been witnessed. Ethan survived, barely, but he made it. And when he could stand again, when the bruises had faded and the stitches held, he turned to Maggie one morning and said, "I want to leave this place." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Take me with you." He did. They sold the cabin to a family expecting their first child, packed their things, what little they owned, and set out west, beyond the mountain ridge, toward Oregon Territory. They never looked back. But word of them did linger in Millstone Junction. The townsfolk would sometimes speak of the scarred woman who stood unflinching in fire, of the quiet man who fought not just for a woman, but for her right to be whole, and of the morning when, in the smoke and the blood and the breaking of day, something like grace passed through a tired town and stayed behind. Years later, a child would ask why Maggie never wore a veil, and Ethan would smile, reaching for her hand, and say, "Because she has nothing left to hide." Love had made her beautiful, and this time everyone knew it. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that love can still rise from dust, danger, and disgrace, then don't forget to hit that hype button to let us know you're out there riding with us. And if you want more love stories like this, set in the raw beauty of the American frontier, where scars are worn with pride and hearts fight harder than fists, then subscribe to Wild West Love Stories and saddle up for the next ride. Until then, may your heart be brave, your spirit be free, and your story worth remembering. See you down the trail.